Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be an episode of It Came From the Network. The topic of this episode, Starrcade 86, brought to us by Jim Crockett Promotions, the Night of the Skywalkers. And if you haven't seen It Came From the Network, this is where we review the bad, good, sometimes great, sometimes weird, sometimes wacky stuff you can find formerly on the WWE Network, now on Peacock. With that being said, let's jump right in with the first match of the night. Lightning Tim Horner and Nelson Royal versus Rocky and Don the Canoodle brothers. I thought this was a really good opener, a lot more fast-paced than I expected it to be. One of the few matches on here that pleasantly surprised me and goes further than what I would have thought if I looked at it on paper. Rocky and Don Canoodle are a team that one of those teams that are kind of forgotten in time, but they were a really great team at this time reign, and one of the top teams in all of wrestling. This was a really good opener and a really good way to start a Starrcade match. Got you right up and right excited for the show. Horner and Nelson Royal pick up the win. I'm going to give this one a 4. Like I said, I thought it was a really good opener. Now coming off of that, and there's a theme in that we're going to see. With Rocky and Don Canoodle both being brothers, we're going to see the theme carry through the show where famous wrestling families or just wrestling families are involved in a lot of the matches on here. It's very interesting to watch going forward. Coming off of that, our second match of the evening, Brad Armstrong, again from the famous Armstrong family, versus Jimmy Garvin. Jimmy Garvin, part of the Garvin family. I believe Ronnie Garvin is his stepfather. I might be wrong on that. But, again, here we have another legacy, at least one of the two legacy wrestlers in the match. This match was a little bit underwhelming with the participants because Brad Armstrong is a fantastic wrestler, one of the most underrated wrestlers of all time. Jimmy Garvin, as well, is an also fantastic wrestler, also somewhat underrated. I just kind of felt like they never really got off the ground running with this. The match ends up being a time limit draw, which is kind of a weird ending, which is another thing we're going to see a lot on this show is some weird decisions on the ending. I'm going to give this match a 3. I feel like it could have and should have been better. But it could be just some guys don't work well together no matter how good the two different opponents are. Now the next match of the evening, Hector Guerrero, yet another legacy from the legendary Guerrero family, and Baron von Raschke versus Shaska Whatley and the Barbarian. Barbarian, again, has ties to, I believe, his daughter wrestles. I might be wrong. But it's his daughter or his niece? It's his niece. It's his niece that actually wrestles. But anyway, I digress. We see part Shaska Whatley and the Barbarian parts of the Paul Jones Army, which kind of are thought of in history as a jobber faction. But if you watch the show and you pay attention and you see how many matches are in here, they were a lot more important to the card. And yeah, they may not have been the Four Horsemen, but they did help sell these cards, and they did help build these matches here. This is a match, again, this actually underwhelmed to me. I thought this would be a lot better than it was, and I understand the Baron was at the end of his career. Hector Guerrero is a fantastic wrestler. Shaska Whatley is a great wrestler. Barbarian would go on to do a lot more than he did here. Hector Guerrero and Baron von Raschke pick up the win. I'm going to give this one a 2. Again, it was very underwhelming. It felt a little bit slow, and even for the time frame. And I'm not trying to keep 2021 eyes on this or 2022 eyes on this, but it still felt slow-paced and not important for a Starrcade match, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like it fit on the card. Coming off of that, we get the Russian team of Crusher Khrushchev and Ivan Koloff versus the Kansas Jayhawks, Bobby Jaggers, and Dutch Mantell. I had high hopes again for this match. I thought it was a pretty solid match. It's a no DQ match for the U.S. Tag Team titles. Uh, Ivan Koloff, again, another underrated wrestler, Dutch Mantel as well. Bobby Jaggers, I think he's one of them guys that the more time and we're 35 plus years away from this now, the further away we get from his career, the more that people are going to forget about Bobby Jaggers, but he was a good wrestler. Crusher Khrushchev would go on to be Smash and Demolition and Repo Man, and I believe, again, talking about ties, his son, Dakota Darso, also wrestles, so there we go, another family legacy in this match. I thought this was a decent match. I felt like it could have been a little better. Again, the main gripe I had with this match is it felt more in place on like a featured match on Saturday night's main event, or WCW Saturday Night, or WCW as it was called back then, more than it felt like a Starrcade match. The Russians pick up the win in this one. I'm going to give this one a 3. It was good. I felt like it could have been better. Next up, we have an Indian strap match, and I know if that's politically incorrect, that's what it was called here. I do apologize. We have Wahoo McDaniel, which that is his specialty, versus Ravishing Rick Rude, a young Rick Rude, who's managed in this by Paul Jones. Again, keeping on that theme that there's a Paul Jones's Army is all through the show. This match to me was very slow paced, even for the time. It was very methodical. I know Wahoo was towards the end of his run, and Rick Rude was towards the beginning of what would be a legendary career. I just didn't feel like it ever felt like a lot of strap or chain matches have since then. It didn't have that importance and that gravitas that a lot of these style of matches make. It kind of just felt like it was a gimmick, and they did Wahoo's thing just to do Wahoo's thing. Wahoo McDaniel picks up the win here. I'm going to give it a 2. After the match, we get some shenanigans with Paul Jones's Army and faces run down. Again, another underwhelming match that didn't feel important to this card. This felt like something you could have seen on any house show during the run during this time. It just didn't feel like a Starrcade match. Now, coming up next, we have Sam Houston, brother of Jake the Snake Roberts and Rockin' Robin, and son of Grizzly Smith, going up against Bill Dundee, father of Jamie Dundee, a.k.a. JC Ice of PG-13. Again, the family ties keep going. For the Central States Championship, the NWA Central States Championship, this was a decent match. I thought it was pretty good. I feel like after seeing the last couple matches, this picked it up a little bit from those. I like Sam Houston. I feel like he was a little bit prior to his time. Sam Houston, to me, was in an era where the wrestlers had the builds of football players and heavyweight boxers, whereas now wrestlers have more of a build of gymnasts or basketball players, more of a slender athletic build than a bulky build. Not to say that one is wrong and the other is right. Sam Houston was, looking at it then, he looked thin and he looked small compared to the competition. He'd probably be one of the bigger guys in wrestling now, but in time frame, it didn't look, he looked small. Houston picks up a win after Bill Dundee gets caught using Sam Houston's boot against him. Sam Houston picks up the win by DQ. I'm going to give this match a 3. I thought it was good. I thought it started picking back up after a couple disappointing matches. We got this here, which was a good match. Not a great match, nothing to write home about, but still a good undercard match. Next up, we have the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, versus Paul Jones. Again, we're talking about Paul Jones's Army, in a hair versus hair match in a cage. Famously, they had a multi-year feud. Paul Jones had shaved Jimmy Valiant's head. Before this, the hair in this case was Big Bad Mama's hair. Jimmy Valiant's a valet. I thought this match, again, It was slow paced. It was boring. It legitimately, this was I wouldn't say the worst match on the night. And that's not saying nothing. I like Jimmy Valiant. I like handsome Jimmy Valiant. He was, at the time, and for most of his career, his forte wasn't in ring. His forte was connecting with the crowd and his character and his promos. Paul Jones was well past his prime here, so he couldn't hold up his end. I feel like Jimmy Valiant had better matches with members of Paul Jones' army, where he would fight like the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez, or Shaska Watley, or the Barbarian, or even Rick Rude. I feel like those matches were better than this one. I understand why this one happened, and I understand the importance. So for that, Jimmy Valiant does pick up the win here. I'm going to give this a 2. This is probably my least favorite match on the card. I think there's better Jimmy Valiant matches. And honestly, I haven't seen any of Paul Jones's work when he was a full-time wrestler, or if I did, I forgot about it. But I want to say he has to have better matches than this out there. With that being said, going on to our next match, we get a street fight, and a lot of these matches are gimmicked, if you notice, which is kind of interesting as well. We got Big Bubba Rogers versus Rugged Ronnie Garvin, again carrying on the family ties, stepfather of Jimmy Garvin. I thought this was a decent match. You could tell Big Bubba Rogers, who would go on to be the big boss man later in his career, you could tell he was a little bit young to the wrestling business, and Ronnie Garvin had to carry a lot of the match, which was par for the course. Ronnie Garvin, and at the time, and this is where time and knowledge changes perception of things. I didn't realize how long Ronnie Garvin was in the business at the time when I was watching this. I thought he was a newer wrestler because this was one of the first times I had seen him at the time. And he had only been on the scene a couple years. Little did I know, at that point he was into wrestling over a decade, and he was already someone that was built up as a major star in a lot of other promotions, which I learned later on. He carried this match. He carried Big Bubba Rogers. Not to say that Big Bubba Rogers wouldn't go on to be a great wrestler himself, and you could see flashes of this here. He carried him to a really good match, a decent match here. Bubba picked up the win. I'm going to give this match a 3. I thought it was solid. Again, another match that felt like it belonged on the card. Might not have been the greatest match, but it felt important, and it had some gravitas, had some weight behind it, had some importance in the feud. So to me, for that, I give this match a 3. Now coming up next, probably one of my top 5 favorite feuds in the history of wrestling, and it's represented in this match. Tully Blanchard, who his daughter Tessa wrestles, again keeping the family ties, versus Dusty Rhodes, who his sons Cody and Dustin, and also his daughter-in-law Brandy, all have been wrestlers. Wrestling here for the TV Championship in a First Blood match. I really enjoyed this match, and much like I said with Jimmy Valiant, Dusty Rhodes more leaned on his connection with his crowd, leaned more on using his character to build a story. The story being told in this match was really fantastic. And then we get to the end, and it's a trope, and it's a thing that's mentioned. We get the Dusty finish, which, equals something wonky is going to happen. And you don't realize it as you're watching real time how often the Dusty finish happens. And then when you start watching these things back, you realize, oh, okay, that's why it is called the Dusty finish. Because he leaned heavy on it in his matches. Tully picks up the win after Dusty bloodies Tully, but the referee's knocked down. J.J. Dillon helps him wipe the blood off himself. Then he bloodies Dusty. The ref gets revived, sees Dusty bleeding, and gives a match to Tully Blanchard. Again, like I said, an example of the Dusty finish. I thought this match was really good. The story being told in it, I'm going to give this a 4. You got 2 legendary wrestlers carrying on, like I said, one of the legendary feuds, one of my favorite feuds in pro wrestling history, Dusty Rhodes versus the Four Horsemen, or just Tully himself. really good match. Another really, this is from the Bubba Rogers on, the card really felt like, okay, now I'm watching Starrcade. And if you don't remember, or if you're too young to have known, Starrcade was on the level of WrestleMania, and in some years it was a bigger spectacle and a bigger event than WrestleMania based on what was going on there. Now, coming off of that, we get the match that the night is named after, the Skywalker match, the scaffold match, with the Legion of Dune, the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, versus the Midnight Express. This version is Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, who have Bubba Rogers, the aforementioned Bubba Rogers, and Jim Cornette in their corner. The Road Warriors have Paul Ellerling. They all get involved in this, which is why I want to bring that up. The match itself, as far as match quality, it's a lot of kick and push. A lot more of this is a spectacle. The way that they sold each other's moves, the way that they sold what they were doing on top of the scaffold, the chasing around, everything about this, the story, the build-up, it led to what I thought was a fantastic match. I mean, you don't need to have 1,000 German suplexes or 47 different counters to make a match fun and interesting. Sometimes it's the characters and the story that they're telling back and forth. I go back to like WrestleMania 6 with Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. Not a great pure wrestling match, but storyline-wise, great match. One of the greatest crowd participations and one of the matches that a lot of people consider a great match that if you put it up against other matches, you know, like let's say Steamboat Savage, it's not going to hold up as well. This is one of those things where the spectacle, the ambiance, the story being told on top of the scaffold all helped bring the story along. Road Warriors pick up the win here. I'm going to give it a 4. Famously, after the match, we see Jim Cornette fall from the scaffold and blow out his knee. And supposedly, the story goes that Big Bubba Rogers was supposed to catch him. Cornette was swinging back and forth, and he was on his front swing, which is why he fell kind of 5 feet in front of Bubba when he let go, where he should have let go on the back swing where he would have fell more towards Bubba, gave him an opportunity to catch. I digress. I'm not blaming Jim Cornette on this. I don't know if he could. He has said that he has very bad vision, so I don't know if he could have seen where Bubba was when he let go. Maybe he thought he was under him. Who knows? But anyway, I digress. Again, like I said, just a great match, a great story being told. Another great tag match, which leads us to another match, this time in a cage, because we're coming from 2 different arenas, so they could switch back and forth. From I want to say it was anyway, the Omni in Atlanta, and I want to say the Greensboro Coliseum was what it was. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. Hit me up down there. Next up, we have the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson defending the World Tag Team Champions. Ricky Morton has a son that's a wrestler now, against Ole and Arn Anderson. Arn's son, Brock Anderson, is wrestling now. The actual Anderson family, other than them two, isn't really related. The Minnesota Wrecking Crew, as they were known here. Again, another really great match. A lot of people talk about the Rock and Roll Midnight feud. I kind of like more the Rock and Roll when they fought against the guys like the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Tully and Arn later on, the Russians, when they had a bigger opponent they were going against. The face and peril that they used during their matches with Ricky Morton selling made the Rock and Roll special. Not saying that the Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express feud wasn't great. It's a legendary feud. But if we're talking about one match, match by match, I enjoy matches like this one here a lot more than any solo match against the Midnight Express. I thought this was a really awesome match. The Rock and Rolls pick up the win on this one. I'm going to give this match a 4. Another really solid match, another really solid showing. two of the great tag teams of this era. I thought it was a fantastic addition on the show. And again, we're really picking up and feeling like a Starrcade now. Last but not least, the main event of the evening, the Nature Boy Ric Flair versus the Russian Nightmare Nikita Koloff for the World Heavyweight Championship. I thought, again, this was a really good match. We have Ric Flair in the prime of his time, and again, Rick, of course, three of the four of his children have gone on to become wrestlers, so there's our tie again. I thought this was a really solid match. Nikita was a lot better wrestler than a lot of people give him credit for. As far as a character and connection with the crowd, this was probably the peak of Nikita. He had just turned face and took what this would have been Magnum TA's spot in this match. After Magnum's crash, he took over this spot. And rumored Magnum would have won this match. Unfortunately, Nikita didn't. We end the match with a double disqualification, which takes a little bit from the match itself. But just being able to watch Ric Flair in his prime, one of the greatest that's ever done it, if not the greatest that's ever done it, this match really felt special. I give this match a 4. I probably would have given it a 5 if there was an actual winner. The double DQ, again, took away from the feeling of the Starrcade. So for me, that's where I give it a little bit of a demerit. With all that being said, overall, I'm going to give the night a 3. I thought it was good, not great. The last 5 matches were spectacular. The middle of the card between the first match and the tag match with the first match, Horner and Royal versus the Canoodles, and Big Bubba Rogers versus Ronnie Garvin. That area between those two, I thought all underwhelmed. But the rest of the show really felt special. If I were to recommend, I'd watch that first match and then everything from Big Bubba Rogers versus Ronnie Garvin on. You can watch it as a full show. It's not that terrible that I wouldn't recommend watching the whole thing. It is a little bit long. I want to say it clocks in right around 4 hours. There's a lot of promo. There's a lot of stalling time that they included here. But overall, I thought it was a good show. Not my favorite Starrcade, but a really good Starrcade. Let me know what you think. If you watch this, if you remember this from when you were a kid, if you've gone back and watched it recently, or if you take my suggestions on what matches to go back and watch. Let me know in the comments here. Hit the like button, share button. Please subscribe to the video if you haven't subscribed. That all helps out the channel immensely. And if you followed and watched this video this far into the match, leave me a comment down here to let me know you're watching all the way to the end. Let's put Nikita in there for Nikita Koloff, and to let me know that you watch all the way to the end. I definitely appreciate that. It really helps, for one, to motivate me to make these videos because I know people are watching and care. And also, it helps the algorithm, to be perfectly honest, to have comments down there. But anyway, I digress. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of It Came From the Network.